Let's go back to the late 1800s, a time when psychology is barely considered a science. There are no standardized assessments, no diagnostic criteria, no outcome measures, just observations, interpretations, and theory. A patient is across from a clinician. They're struggling emotionally, cognitively, and behaviorally. And the clinician has to answer a question: is this improving? But there's a problem. There's no way to measure it. Enter William Wundt. In a small lab in Leipzig, he begins doing something radical. He tries to measure the mind. Reaction time, perception, attention. For the first time, psychology begins shifting from philosophy to data. A few decades later, another shift. Alfred Binet is tasked with identifying children who need additional educational support. But instead of relying on intuition alone, he develops one of the first psychological tests, structured, repeatable, and scored. And suddenly a new question emerges. How do we know if the test actually works? Is it consistent? Is it accurate? Does it measure what we think it measures? These questions, reliability, validity, and error, become the foundation of modern psychology. Fast forward to today, you're sitting for the NCE or NCMHCE or some other test that gets you toward becoming a mental health professional. You're not being asked to run a study, but you're being asked something deeper. Do you understand how we know what we know? Because as a clinician, you're not just listening to people, you're interpreting patterns, symptoms, scores, behaviors, and progress over time. And statistics, whether you like it or not, is the language behind all of it. So today we're going to break it down in a way that actually makes sense for the exam and for the work you're stepping into. Welcome to the Licensure Lifeline podcast, your guide to navigating the path toward licensure with clarity and confidence. I'm your host, Matt Lawson. Each week here at the podcast, we take a look at topics and break them down into something practical, understandable, and actually useful for both the exam and real clinical work. Because this isn't just about passing the test, it's about becoming the clinician you're meant to be. Before we get started, just a couple of things of business to catch up on. I will be live with the Circle Group. This is a community of individuals studying to become therapists. I'm kind of looking at this as almost like a companion to the podcast, where I'll cover go deeper into some of the topics. There will be quizzes and tests that you can take within the community. There will be places where you can share your wins and losses and confusions. I'm even going to have host some different live events. So there will be a weekly Friday lunch where I just give people a chance to ask questions and connect with other clinicians. And, I'm looking at things like book clubs and stuff like that. So keep in tuned. I should have the link up for that within the next couple of weeks. I know I've been promising this for a while. It is something that is I'm really excited about, and I'm hoping that it helps. So after all that, let's go ahead and get into the main topic today. We're looking at statistics, and I'm really hoping this episode helps. I know this is something that gives most people pause on any test. But before we get into it, let's go to the news. Okay, recent updates with Google Gemini have focused on improving how systems respond to users in mental health crisis. The platform now includes a one-touch connection to crisis resources, more empathic language, and clearer paths to real human support. This comes after serious concerns, including a lawsuit about how AI systems may respond to vulnerable users. If you've been following any news about some of the chatbots that are out there, one of the pieces that continues to come up with them is they are woefully not prepared for individuals that are in mental health crisis. I've heard just extremely alarming situations where a person was obviously pushing towards suicide, and because the algorithms are set up to get the individual to like the algorithm as much as possible, they kind of encouraged what the person was saying. They validated things like, yes, maybe you shouldn't be on this planet anymore. And there really wasn't anything along the lines of one, being able to identify that the individual is in crisis, and two, have some type of resource that can actually connect them to a human being to support them. So this is good to hear. It's a good step. A lot more needs to be done to protect individuals. This is our evolving world as clinicians. This is something that we really need to be on the lookout for, and seeing how we can be part of the solution. All right, let's go on to the next story. Wearables like Apple Watch, Fitbit, Aura are increasingly being used to track things like mood, stress, sleep, physiological markers like heart rate and heart rate variability. But here's the catch: these metrics don't always align with actual emotional experiences. Tracking happiness can sometimes make people feel even worse. So, this is, we're going to get into statistics today and some of the number stuff. It's a funny joke as a therapist. I tell people all the time. I hear my wife tell people all the time. I hear other therapist friends tell people all the time. The reason they got into therapy is because they don't want to do math anymore. And as technology evolves and as we see, some of these things coming out, like things like wearables, this actually represents a really cool opportunity to work with somebody in between sessions and kind of getting some baseline, basic understandings of situations. I've had clients, specifically with the Aura Ring, that measures stressful situations, and they're able to see, throughout the day, the things that stress them out. Sometimes are really, really obvious. Sometimes stress is coming from places that kind of surprises them. I had one individual that really liked playing pickleball, and they were seeing that every time they went out there, their Aura Ring would show them that they were getting stressed out. And, they're sitting there telling me like, yeah, I love pickleball. It's a great stress reliever. It's how I just relax. Sometimes at the end of the day or on the weekends. But what they were missing was that they're so competitive. When they get to the court, their stress level actually goes up as they prepare to battle, as they prepare to play pickleball. So it's actually increasing their stress. So, being able to kind of see that and look at it and, help them with mindset going into these situations so that they can get that stress relief out of it. So they can recognize, like, is this match you have come up with friends actually necessitate you getting all ramped up and competitive? So both of these stories, bring in data. And as clinicians, our job isn't just to hear the headline that the person is bringing in. It's to ask, how was this measured? What does this actually mean? And should I trust this information coming in? And I think that's going to be coming up more and more as therapy evolves in kind of this emerging technology world that we're going into. All right, folks, quick pause here. I'm going to try out some ads in the podcast. I'm probably going to be doing a lot of these just on my own, but it's something I just want to try out and see how it goes. Today we've been breaking down some of the statistics, or we're getting ready to break down some of the statistics, and how to interpret data, and how to understand outcomes, how to know if something is actually working. But here's the reality. As clinicians, we're not just interpreting data, we are also documenting it. And if you're anything like me, documentation can become one of the most draining parts of our jobs. I cannot stand doing notes at the end of my day. I've tried to do them in between session. If you've had to do notes already, you know what I mean. It's not fun. It takes the absolute air out of clinical practice. So enter Simple Practice. I have used Simple Practice when I had my own private practice. It is a great tool. It's an all-in-one EHR designed specifically for therapists, for scheduling, intake, documentation, all in one place. This makes billing, this makes note taking, this makes everything so seamless. And any way that I can help you, get some of the red tape, cut through some of the red tape in your day, and actually focus on being a clinician over a better note writer, I'm going to give it to you. So look in the show notes for links for Simple Practice. They have a really good trial going on. You can check it out for 7 days for free. plus 50% off your first month. You can cancel anytime. Again, they make everything really, really easy. Check it out. All right, let's get into the core of today's episode. And I want to start with this. If statistics has ever felt confusing or overwhelming, it's not because you can't understand it. It's because it's usually taught in a way that doesn't connect to how you actually think as a clinician or as a person for that matter. Something I've spoken a lot about is anchoring information. And, I'll give some examples in some of the stuff I'm talking about today. But the more that you can anchor this information to real world examples, to personal examples that you can use for yourself, the easier it is for people to remember. A lot of the times when people struggle to remember things, it's because they don't have good mental anchors for those topics. They just kind of float around in there. So let's start with central tendencies. So these are things like mean, median, and mode. Central tendency is just a way of answering one question. What's typically here? So mean is the average, median is the middle, and mode is the most common. Real world examples, let's say that you're running a group for anxiety. You have scores, 5, 6, 6, 7, and 8. And one client scores a 20. So that 20 is going to impact a lot of the central tendency, right? The mean gets pulled up. The median stays a little bit more stable. So if you're trying to understand what your typical client looks like within this study, the median is often a better reflection when things are uneven. So when you have outliers like that. Memory trick here, mean equals messed up by extremes. Median equals middle and more stable. If you see the word outlier in a question, your brain should immediately go to median. All right? So those were the central tendencies. Let's move on to variability. Average alone often doesn't tell the whole story. Variability answers this question. How consistent are the results? Let's say you try a new intervention. Everyone improves slightly, some improve a lot, and some don't improve at all. Both groups could have the same average, but they are different clinically. Low variability equals predictable results, while high variability equals inconsistent outcomes. Variability equals are we all in the same place or all over the map? If you see wide differences in outcomes, think high variability over high standard deviation. All right. Next up, we have correlation and the big trap. So this one shows up everywhere and it trips people up all the time. To explain it simply, correlation answers this question. Do these two things move together? So an example here would be clients who exercise report less anxiety. Now, let's slow that down. So what does that actually mean? You may hear that thing where it's correlation doesn't necessarily mean equal causation. That's what we're talking about here, right? So, does exercise actually reduce anxiety, or do less anxious people exercise more, or is there a third factor? Correlation tells you there is a relationship. It does not tell you why, right? Let me say that again. Correlation tells you there's a relationship. It does not tell you why. Correlation is a clue, not a conclusion. There's so many funny stories out there about, especially from the news, where, a newscaster will come on and talk about how there's a correlation of something like, people that eat ice cream in the summer correlates to less stress. And okay, people tend to drink more or tend to eat more ice cream in the summer. People tend to be less stressed in the summer, and I'm not joking about that. You actually will see a drop off in your caseload in the summertime because people just feel better. And places actually get seasons. But there's so many factors that go into why people are less stressed out in the summertime over ice cream. You just happen to see these people who are also stressed out and took this study also eating ice cream. But can you say the ice cream is responsible for less stress? I mean, ice cream is amazing, but not that amazing. So, all right. Let's move on. Statistical versus clinical significance. This is where you move from test taker to clinician, right? So, statistical significance answers this question: is this result likely real or just chance? Clinical significant answers a different question: does this actually matter for the client? A study shows depression scores improve by 1 point. With a large enough sample, that can be statistically significant. But if your client still can't get out of bed, it's not clinically meaningful, right? Let me say that. So you have like something that shows this large sample and there's statistical significance, but that client is still struggling in their day to day. So to them, it's not necessarily, this information that you have is not necessarily clinically meaningful. Statistical significance lives in the research. Clinical significance lives in the therapy room. Got that one? This is another one of those that you hear a lot. People will cite studies on the news or in papers or whatever. And if the studies aren't large enough, you got to wonder about actual statistical significance and clinical significance for that matter. You want large studies. You want studies over various groups of people that shows more of a diversity, more of the diversity that you would see in a general population. So many studies that were done like in the 50s, 60s, 70s, you saw them done on basically white males. And, they made all these assumptions, and it's kind of, one of the things that you hear with like the DSM and things like that, especially back in the day, that there was there pieces there that really worked against anybody that wasn't a white male. And it was for this reason. They might find statistical significance, but there's not clinical significance. Okay, next up, reliability versus validity. So this is another one that shows up a lot. Reliability answers, can I trust this to be consistent? Validity answers, is this actually measuring what it is supposed to? So I want you to imagine a scale that always says it weighs 150 pounds, even though, or it says you weigh 150 pounds, even though you don't. It's consistent and reliable, but it's wrong, so it's not valid. Clinical insight. In mental health, you need both. So you need you need a test that is both reliable, and that means it's repeatable. But you also need it to be valid. It needs to actually show the information that it's supposed to show. So valid equals valuable. A test can be reliable and still be wrong. Okay, so it can be reliable but still be wrong. It still needs to be valid. All right, this next group, I always kind of mess this one up. I'm really hoping we can clarify some things here. So type 1 and type 2 errors. Type 1 equals false positive. Type 2 equals false negative. Real world example. Type 1, you think a treatment works, but it doesn't. Type 2 error, you miss a treatment that actually works. Okay? So type 1, I found something, the memory hook here. Type 1, I found something, but I didn't. So type 2, I'm missing helpful interventions, right? Do you get that? It's kind of like the type 1 is you're convinced this treatment works, one, but it actually doesn't. And then with type 2, you miss the treatment altogether that actually works. The treatment that actually would have worked with somebody. All right. So when we look at statistics through the clinical lens, you're asking what's typical? How consistent is it? Is there a relationship? Does it actually matter? Can I trust the measurements? And what decisions should I make? That's what the exam is really testing for. Not whether you can memorize definitions, but whether you can think clearly about information and make the best decisions for your clients. All right, let's move on to some questions. All right, question number 1. A counselor is reviewing outcome data from a group therapy program. One client reports extremely high symptoms severity compared to the rest of the group, creating an outlier in the data set. Which measure of central tendency would best represent the typical client experience? Would this be the mean, median, mode, or range? Correct answer is median. Rationale here, the mean is pulled in the direction of the extreme values, outliers. Median represents the middle value and is resistant to distortion, while the mode is the most frequent value but may not reflect central tendency well, and the range is a measure of variability, not central tendency. Again, if you see outlier, think median. Question number 2. A study finds that a new anxiety intervention produces high, consistent results across participants. Some improve significantly while others show little to no change. Which statistical concept best describes this pattern? Is it a high mean, high variability, high validity, or high reliability? Answer is B, high variability. High variability means results are spread out and inconsistent. A high mean only tells you about the average outcome, not the spread, while validity refers to accuracy, not consistency across participants. Reliability refers to consistency of measurements, not outcomes. A little clinical insight here, high variability equals treatment may not work equally for everyone. All right. Question number 3. Correlation versus causation. Researchers find that increased social media use is associated with higher levels of anxiety in adolescence. Which of the following is the most accurate interpretation of this finding? Social media use causes anxiety. Anxiety causes increased social media use. There is a relationship between social media use and anxiety. Social media use eliminates anxiety. The correct answer is C. There is a relationship between social media use and anxiety. Remember, correlation indicates a relationship, not cause and effect. Directionality cannot be determined from correlation alone. Both A and B assume causation, which is not supported. Correlation does not equal causation. Watch that one. But just keep that in mind. Correlation does not equal causation. Question 4. A large study finds a statistically significant reduction in depression scores following treatment. However, the average improvement is minimal and not noticeable in clients' daily function. What does this best illustrate? High reliability, high validity, statistical significance without clinical significance without statistical significance. The answer is going to be C, statistical significance without clinical significance. Statistical significance equals unlikely due to chance. Okay? Again, statistical significance, unlikely due to chance. Clinical significance, meaningful real world impact. A small change can be statistically significant in a large sample. Clinical insight here, what matters in practice is whether the clients actually feel and function better. All right, next up, a depression assessment consistently produces similar results when administered multiple times under the same condition, but it does not accurately measure depressive symptoms. Which of the following best describes this situation? High validity, low reliability, high reliability, low validity, low reliability, high validity, or low reliability, low validity. The correct answer is B, high reliability with low validity. Reliability equals consistency is present here, while validity equals accuracy is lacking here. A measure can be consistent but still measure the wrong construct. A test can be reliable and still be wrong. Last question. A researcher concludes that a new therapy is effective when in reality it has no true effect. This is an example of a type 1 error, type 2 error, low reliability, low variability. Answer is going to be A, type 1 error. Type 1 equals false positives, while type 2 equals false negatives. Type 1 equals I found something but I didn't. And that's going to be it for our questions. And that is going to be it for our episode today. We stepped into a part of the exam and honestly a part of clinical work that a lot of people try to avoid as much as possible. Statistics, are just one of those areas that, just doesn't feel as therapy as some of the other things that we do. But we talked about stats today, and it really isn't just about numbers, right? It's about understanding the patterns, making informed decisions, and knowing when something actually is helping your clients. I really do recommend reading journals. Pick a couple that you like. It's one of those things that goes along with being in this profession. Really reading up on some of these things, reading up on some of the stuff that we have, reading up on the statistically heavy things. And it does, this stuff does make sense. And again, as I was saying before, giving your mind something more to anchor the information to really, really does help. And you can, this doesn't have to be just these general journals. There's so many that really get into areas that you might be interested in. And if you're interested in the topic, you're going to be able to pay a little bit more attention to it. And you're going to be able to recall the information and the way that they got to that information that much quicker. But a little bit more of a recap here. We covered some core concepts that you need to know on the exam: mean, median, and why outliers matter. Variability and what consistency actually looks like, correlation and why it doesn't equal causation, statistical versus clinical significance, reliability versus validity, and more importantly, we talked about how to think like a clinician when you see this material. Like I said earlier, I think we're just going to get into a place where we are going to be seeing more and more data in our practice. Using more and more data to support the people that we're working with. So this is not something that, you just memorize or get down for the test and it goes away from there. But it really can help you just be that much better of a clinician and support the people you work with that much better. Thanks for hanging out for yet another episode of Licensure Lifeline. And until next time, never stop learning.